Tim Heaphy, so much of what we know about the plot in Georgia, we know from Trump's own voice on the call with Brad Raffensperger. And I rarely, John Heilemann can attest to this, I rarely give our viewers homework. But I remember when I listened to it saying, I can't believe I'm telling you this, but please listen to the whole thing. I mean, it is Trump's hands on the steering wheel of trying to cheat his way into the presidency, trying to deny the will of Georgia voters. And to your point, the first time we got to talk to you, Tim, all that's come out since has made the evidence against Trump stronger, has made it more clear how concerted the effort was, how wide it was, and how deep it was. What is your sense in terms of what Fani Willis has developed and what may be imminent in Georgia?
Look, I think what Fani Willis has developed is much what we laid out, Nicole, in our report, what we laid out in our hearings. Some of it's included in the special counsel's indictment. The facts here have been relatively plain for a while, and they are shocking. You're exactly right. The call itself, the January 2nd call between the former president and Secretary Raffensperger, just on its face, if you listen to it, is shocking. It's the president of the United States imploring a state official to just find 11,000 some votes. But when you plug that recording in to the context of events that we developed, that special counsel developed, that Fani Willis is now developing, after he had been told repeatedly that those specific claims that he cites to Raffensperger are meritless, when Raffensperger himself refutes them, when he'd been told before the January 2nd call that the vice president has no authority to do anything but accept the votes that had already been certified by the Secretary of State in Georgia. It's particularly egregious. It's really important because it is perhaps the most dramatic manifestation of this multi-part plan to disrupt the joint session and prevent the transfer of power.
Tim, so much of what the Select Committee effectively developed for the public was evidence of the known falsity. I think that's a term that maybe we learned from the Dominion case. But this idea that they knew there weren't dead people that voted. There's a Mark Meadows text that we've learned about where he's writing to Eric Hirschman. My son found 12 obituaries and 6 other possibles depending on the voter roll accuracy. Hirschman writes, that sounds more like it. Maybe he can help Rudy Giuliani find the other 10,000. Meadows, in what I find a haunting LOL. We're talking about ending democracy, ending the peaceful transfer of power. And he says, LOL about the delta between how many dead people voted and how many Rudy was saying. I mean, they knew it was all BS. And the lives that were destroyed and altered forever will never be the same. The trauma that Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman experienced was a story that the committee told, but there were many people that will never want to be election workers, will never want to volunteer as poll workers. And a lot of that happened in Georgia. So what are your thoughts today?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this has real consequences, right? These kinds of allegations are not simply rhetorical. They're not political speech. They have really concrete consequences. People breaking into private homes in Georgia is exactly the sort of outgrowth of the rhetoric that the president and others, his lawyers in particular, used in Georgia. So Shaye Moss, Ruby Freeman, Al Schmidt in Philadelphia, Secretary Raffensperger, there's Jocelyn Benson in Michigan. There's so many people who literally had people outside their house or emailing, texting them incredibly vile, hateful messages, threatening messages, right? This is awful enough that we're talking about a political attempt to subvert the joint session. But look, Jack Smith and Fani Willis are going to develop the real human cost of this, real people whose safety was threatened. And frankly, it continues to be an issue as long as the president publicly says, if you come after me, I'm coming after you. People take that seriously, Nicole. That's why, as Glenn Kirshner was saying in your previous segment, this will be taken really seriously by any of the judges before whom these cases are pending.
Do you think, Tim Heaphy, that Jeffrey Clark, who sort of orchestrated the coup atop DOJ, and Mark Meadows, who traveled down to Georgia to be part of overturning Trump's defeat there, do you think they'll be charged by Fani Willis tonight or tomorrow?
I think they have exposure, absolutely. As our report indicated, I think arguably both Jeff Clark and Mark Meadows and a number of others participated very directly in the plot to overturn the Georgia election and others. Mark Meadows, as you said, went to a recount place. We actually had testimony that he wanted to bring challenge coins, right? These trinkets that people give out as sort of a White House swag. And it was like Cassidy Hutchinson and some of his young staff that said, hey, that may be inappropriate. He was very directly manifesting intent to see this effort succeed. Jeff Clark, he authors that crazy letter that he wants to send to the Georgia legislature saying factually there are serious concerns about the election when DOJ had already exhausted all investigations of alleged voter fraud in Georgia, and putting forth this legal theory that the state legislature can disregard the popular vote. Again, baseless. It didn't get sent because sober, smart people in the Justice Department said no. So absolutely, Clark, Meadows, Giuliani, Eastman, the list goes on of people whose conduct manifested an intent to see this plot succeed.
John Heilman, so much of what the committee, first of all, welcome back. It is very nice to see you, my friend.
Very cool.
And I want to hear your thoughts about where we are right now, right? So much of what we know about Georgia, we learned in Trump's own voice, and then we learned from the extraordinary work of the Select Committee. But it appears that Fani Willis has more. What are you waiting for? What are you looking for?
Well, first, it's great to be back, and I want to bring my own special brand of expertise to this discussion. I'm an expert on none of the legal elements of this, but when it comes to at least one of the two substances that were in question earlier at the very beginning of the segment, ginger mints and vials of cocaine, knowing only a lot about one of those, I won't say which, it's really hard to mix those two up. That's like when you're really, it's a pretty big distinction between the vial of cocaine and the ginger mint. And I think I joke, of course, but I also do point out that it kind of points out the degree to which people like Rudy Giuliani were willing to say the most outlandish, the most outrageous things, impugning, not only making stuff up that was obviously on its face ridiculous, but also impugning the character of these election workers, as you were alluding to before, which is what makes this particular case. I mean, all of Trump's ostensible crimes, alleged crimes have been pretty vile. But this one is in a special category. And I think to the question you're directly asking is that is kind of what has happened over the course of these last now 2.5 years. It's hard to remember the fact that we learned about this phone call on January 3rd of 2021, a couple days before January 6th. The newspaper, all that story broke the weekend right after New Year's. And it was on that precipice of January 6th that I think for a lot of us who had seen a lot of strange goings on and covering all of what was happening between Election Day and January 6th, all the things that Trump and his henchmen were trying to do to overturn the election. It was that moment where I think everyone, even the most cynical, hard-bitten reporters and people who are in the most furious anti-Trumpites on the left, everyone kind of took a gasp when you heard Trump's voice and what is saying what he said. And then what has happened since then, the turn of events that followed from that, losing those 2 Senate seats on January 5th in Georgia, and then coming to January 6th, and everything that's unfolded ever since then. In a lot of ways, this case has been the one that most of us have said, man, if this isn't illegal, nothing is illegal. It can't be legal to do what Donald Trump did, in his own words, in Georgia. And Fani Willis has built this case, a case that kind of on the prima facie basis of it seemed to be the most winnable of all these cases, the most obvious open and shut case of all the cases that Trump is facing. And she has made it all the more formidable, all the more compelling. And we can talk some about what the politics of this are, because let's not forget, Georgia, one of maybe only 5 real battleground states in this coming election, where Donald Trump is every day this trial happens is going to be in front of the voters who rejected him in 2020, who rejected Republican Senate candidates in 2020, who has to win Georgia in order to become president again in 2024. And they are those same voters, those moderate suburban Cobb County, former Republicans, current Republican, wannabe normal Republican voters who said, I've had enough of Donald Trump. Brian Kemp's great. No Donald Trump. Are those people watching this trial play out going to be more likely to come back to the Republican Party if Donald Trump's at the top of it, having seen the way this evidence is going to unfold? I don't think so. Some Republicans who want to win in 2024 should probably think about it.
Well, it's such an interesting political analysis because Georgia Republicans had a chance to go with someone on the coup side of the Trump question, right? I mean, Raffensperger and Kemp, I think both had Republican challengers, and they lost. So at least Georgia Republicans said, I'll stick with Republicans, but the ones who stood up to Trump, not these guys. I thought you were going somewhere else with your expertise. I thought you were going to pull out all the challenge coins that you've collected over the years. But you didn't.
No, your friend Mark McKinnon, the ultimate challenge coin hoarder in America, gives them out at every opportunity. When I heard about the challenge coins, I thought, man, talk about another turn into Never Netherland. But I mean, again, that point, these people were LOLing. I agree with you. One of the most chilling things in any of this email evidence is that LOL from Mark Meadows. It's chilling and appalling, but really chilling on some level that the White House chief of staff, second most powerful person in the country, is LOLing over an attempt to overturn an American election.